What if I told you that the Middle Ages, the so-called Age of Faith, were not an era of pure chastity, silent monasteries, and dutiful prayer, but a time when sexual customs were so bizarre, so unrestrained, and so disturbingly inventive that they could make modern dating apps look like a Sunday school picnic? Welcome to the world of medieval sexuality, a place where moral sermons and unholy pleasures lived side by side, and where the gap between public virtue and private vice was wide enough to swallow empires. If you think you're ready to step into this strange landscape, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to descend into the most unsettling bedroom secrets of the Dark Ages. In our collective imagination, the Middle Ages conjure up visions of castles, knights, and pious villagers praying under candlelight. But beneath that romantic haze lay a society driven by primal impulses that express themselves in ways that would shock even the most liberated modern mind. Imagine a world where religious leaders wrote manuals on aphrodisiac cooking, nobles scheduled sex-like military campaigns, and entire communities turned the most intimate acts into public spectacles. Let's start with one of the most bewildering courtship rituals in human history, a practice called bundling. Picture this: you're a young man in a rural medieval village. Your parents have found you a potential bride, and instead of letting you take her for a walk or share a candlelit dinner, they tie the two of you together in a large sack and put you to bed fully clothed with a wooden board between your bodies. This, they believed, was the perfect way for you to get to know each other. Bundling was essentially the medieval version of a supervised sleepover, except infinitely more awkward. Families not only tolerated it, they actively encouraged it. Special bundling bags were even manufactured for the purpose, an entire micro-industry dedicated to helping couples not touch each other while forcing them to share the same bed. It's a level of cognitive dissonance that defies logic. Religious leaders, of course, hated the practice. They condemned bundling from pulpits, warning that nothing good could come from putting two hormonal young people in bed together. And they were right. Historical records reveal that pregnancy rates among bundling couples were notably higher than in more traditional courtships. It seems nature found a way to bypass wooden planks and moral restraint. If bundling was the awkward prologue to marriage, the medieval bedding ceremony was the uncomfortably public finale. In aristocratic circles, marriage wasn't considered legally binding until it had been consummated, and consummation often required witnesses. Imagine standing in your wedding chamber, your clothes being removed by relatives, while nobles and church officials gather around your bed to watch the first act of your married life. This wasn't a quick peek to confirm the deed. Witnesses sometimes stayed for the entire duration, offering encouragement advice, and in the most intrusive cases inspecting the bedsheets afterward for signs of virginity. In some high-stakes marriages involving land or political alliances, failure to perform under the watchful gaze of the audience could annul the union entirely, forcing the couple to repeat the ordeal. The medieval approach to food and sex was equally strange and often unsettling. Aphrodisiac feasts were not just an indulgence, they were practically a science, or at least the medieval version of one. Nobles and physicians believed that eating certain parts of animals could transfer their fertility or virility to humans. This meant menus rich in bull testicles, ram testicles, and boar testicles roasted, boiled, fried, powdered, or even dissolved in wine. It didn't stop at animal genitals. Some of the more extravagant dishes included sparrow brains believed to quicken the libido and spice blends worth their weight in gold. Wedding receptions often featured such love feasts designed to prime the newlyweds for their first night together, as if the bedding ceremony wasn't pressure enough. These were not meals for the faint of heart or stomach. Even the timing of sexual activity was treated with obsessive complexity. Wealthy couples would consult physicians, astrologers, and priests to determine the perfect moment to conceive. Charts were drawn, moons observed, feast days calculated. The right weather, the right hour, even the right direction for the bed could all play a role. This wasn't romance. It was project management on an intimate scale, with the stakes being nothing less than the continuation of a bloodline. Some of these conception schedules read like military orders. A noble couple might be told, "You will attempt intercourse at midnight on the feast of Saint Anne during the waxing moon, in a chamber facing east, after consuming a meal of saffron and pine nuts." Failure to comply wasn't just ignoring advice, it was tempting fate. In a world where producing heirs could decide the survival of a dynasty, such precision was treated as a sacred duty. The quest for fertility spawned an entire industry of magical underwear and accessories. Women wore girdles inscribed with prayers or astrological symbols, believing these would improve fertility and ensure safe childbirth. Some belts were embroidered with gold thread and set with gemstones, making them as much status symbols as supposed medical aids. Priests would bless these garments for a fee, turning intimate apparel into religious relics. Men had their own charms, amulets containing animal parts rings worn on specific fingers, or even specially blessed loincloths. The most bizarre accessory was the conception stone, a small crystal or gem that women would insert into their clothing during intercourse, convinced it would influence the sex or number of children conceived. Emeralds were said to produce boys sapphires, girls and diamonds twins. Belief in these items was so strong that some couples refused intimacy without them. In elite circles, forgetting your fertility belt before a night of passion was like showing up to a battlefield without your armor. These accessories became both tools of superstition and instruments of social pressure, dividing those who could afford the finest charms from those who had to settle for crude, homemade versions. But fertility wasn't the only intimate matter medieval society dragged into public view. When a marriage soured and divorce was impossible, a wife could accuse her husband of impotence. This accusation triggered one of the most humiliating legal processes imaginable, the impotence trial. The accused would be subjected to medical examinations, intimate questioning, and in the most extreme cases, the dreaded trial by Congress supervised intercourse to prove or disprove the claim. In these trials, court officials and medical experts might watch from behind screens or through peepholes, noting every movement. The man had a set amount of time to perform. Failure meant annulment. Some men tried to cheat with herbal remedies or concoctions made from animal parts, but being caught smuggling aphrodisiacs into the chamber brought even greater shame. The ordeal didn't end with the husband. The wife, too, had to undergo examination and interrogation to prove she was both willing and capable. The process could drag on for months or years, with multiple attempts ordered by the court. Win or lose, the public gossip was devastating, branding both parties for life. As if public trials weren't enough, the medieval church ran one of the most organized prostitution systems in history. In parts of Europe, bishops literally owned brothels, justifying them as a necessary evil to prevent greater sins. Prostitutes worked under church regulation, followed dress codes, and paid rent, which ultimately enriched the very institution that preached chastity from the pulpit. Money from these ventures funded churches, monasteries, and religious festivals. The arrangement was so profitable that attempts to shut it down met fierce resistance. For centuries, the church managed to balance its moral stance with an economic reality too lucrative to abandon, a paradox that perfectly illustrates the medieval talent for reconciling the irreconcilable. When it came to birth control, the creativity and danger reached new extremes. Women wore pouches of weasel testicles around their necks, drank potions made with mercury, or inserted honey-soaked wool before intercourse. Some methods were outright lethal. Others, like sneezing immediately after sex, were merely laughable. The lack of effective contraception ensured that despite all the effort, nature often had the last word. One of the most absurd physical barriers involved half a lemon used as a cervical cap. The citric acid may have had some mild spermicidal effect, but the discomfort must have been considerable. Other methods relied on magic, carrying special stones, burying objects under the full moon, or circling a church 3 times while reciting specific prayers. In these rituals, faith, fear, and folklore blended seamlessly into daily life. Even the withdrawal method, which could have worked, was discouraged by medieval physicians. They warned it would cause blindness, madness, or even death in men, claiming that semen retention was essential for health. In their view, incomplete ejaculation poisoned the male body, a belief that left couples with few practical options for controlling reproduction. The contradictions of medieval sexuality reveal a society caught between strict religious morality and an unrelenting human drive for intimacy. Priests condemned bundling but couldn't stop it. Nobles demanded public consummations yet secretly indulged in brothels. Physicians preached about proper conception timing while prescribing charms and amulets with no medical basis. It was a world where belief could be as powerful as desire. At the same time, these customs often reinforced the social hierarchies of the age. Wealthy couples could afford elaborate conception schedules, luxurious fertility belts, and feasts of exotic aphrodisiacs. The poor made do with homemade charms, local herbs, and whatever rituals they could borrow from superstition. Sex, like everything else, became a reflection of class. For women, the stakes were especially high. Their value in marriage was tied to virginity before the wedding and fertility afterward. Bedding ceremonies, virginity inspections, and fertility charms were all part of a system designed to control female sexuality, while placing the burden of reproduction squarely on their shoulders. Failure to meet expectations could lead to public shame, annulment, or worse. Men were not immune to these pressures. Producing heirs was a measure of masculinity, and impotence trials threatened not only a man's marriage, but his reputation and political alliances. The fear of failure drove some to desperate measures, from consuming dangerous aphrodisiacs to undergoing questionable medical treatments in the hope of restoring their prowess. The intertwining of church, state, and bedroom meant that private acts were rarely private. Marriage was a contract enforced by public scrutiny, and sexuality was regulated not just by moral codes, but by law, medicine, and economics. In this way, intimacy became a stage on which the power struggles of the age were played out. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity of these customs from a modern perspective: the wooden boards of bundling, the gemstone charms, the astronomical conception charts. But for the people of the Middle Ages, these practices were not jokes. They were serious attempts to navigate the uncertainties of love, fertility, and survival in a world without science as we know it. And in that seriousness lies the true strangeness of medieval sexuality. It was not the product of a decadent counterculture or secret underground, but an integral part of mainstream society. From peasant cottages to royal courts, from parish churches to city brothels, the rules and rituals of the bedroom were woven into the fabric of everyday life. As we continue deeper into this journey, we'll uncover even more of these contradictions, moments when moral restraint and primal desire collided head-on. And in those collisions we'll find not only the bizarre, but the deeply human, a reminder that no matter the century, no matter the culture, the heart and the body will always find its own way. Take the aphrodisiac feasts, for example. These weren't dimly lit romantic dinners, they were extravagant public affairs, often staged to impress political allies as much as to arouse the newlyweds. The presentation was part theater, part ritual, with servants parading trays of delicacies like roasted bull testicles or tiny pies filled with ground sparrow brains. The air would be thick with the scent of exotic spices, their cost signaling the host's wealth and worldliness. Spices like saffron, cinnamon, and ginger were imported from distant lands and valued like gold. They were believed to heat the blood, awaken the senses, and inspire desire. When combined with animal organs thought to contain the essence of fertility, the result was a meal that was less about flavor than about symbolism, a kind of edible magic spell. These feasts could last for hours, with musicians playing goblets refilled endlessly, and the guests encouraged to indulge in excess. The boundary between celebration and provocation blurred. By the time the couple retired for their bedding ceremony, the entire gathering was charged with an unspoken anticipation, as though everyone present had a stake in the outcome of the night. Public consummation might sound like the most humiliating custom of all, but in a society where marriage was as much a contract as a romance, it made a certain twisted sense. The presence of witnesses turned sex into proof of virginity, proof of capability, proof of alliance. The marriage bed became a courtroom, the act itself the final signature on a legal document. The etiquette of such events was codified in manuals specifying how long witnesses should stay where they should stand and what they were allowed to say. Some were instructed to offer encouragement or prayers, others to remain silent and simply observe. There were even rules for handling the bed linens afterward, examining them for blood or other evidence before presenting them to the assembled company. And yet, even with all this ritualized control, human nature often defied the rules. Couples found ways to subvert the system, arranging for witnesses to wait outside the door, faking signs of virginity, or quietly ignoring the more intrusive traditions when political stakes were low enough to allow it. Still, the pressure to comply was immense, especially for unions involving land titles or royal bloodlines. The same mix of superstition and control governed the timing of conception. Medieval medical theory was a patchwork of ancient Greek philosophy, astrology, and Christian doctrine. Physicians spoke of humors and balances, while astrologers charted planetary alignments, and priests dictated which days were sinful for sex. The result was a tangled calendar where opportunity could be rare and missing. It could mean months of frustration. To tilt the odds in their favor, some couples traveled to locations thought to enhance fertility, a certain bedchamber in a famous castle, a house blessed by a saint, or a village reputed to have a higher birth rate. These journeys became pilgrimages of a different kind, blending devotion and desire in a way unique to the era. For those unable to conceive despite following all the rules, there was no shortage of remedies to try. Some were simple: a particular diet, a change in sleeping position, while others bordered on the absurd, like bathing in a stew of herbs and animal parts, or sleeping with a fertility charm under the pillow while reciting specific psalms. Such practices reveal a deep truth about the medieval mind, that there was no separation between the physical, the spiritual, and the symbolic. To them, a belt inscribed with a prayer could be as potent as a medical treatment, and the right alignment of stars as important as the health of the body itself. In their world, intimacy was never just between two people, it was a negotiation with the cosmos. This belief in cosmic influence on the bedroom extended to clothing as well. The so-called girdle of Venus wasn't just a romantic name, it was an actual garment, sometimes made of silk or fine linen worn around the hips and embroidered with charms or verses. It was believed to channel divine favor toward fertility, acting as a bridge between the wearer and higher powers. Some girdles were passed down through generations, treasured as family heirlooms. Others were custom-made and blessed before marriage, the ceremony as formal as the wedding itself. These belts could be adorned with tiny bells, gemstones, or metal charms shaped like animals associated with virility, bulls, hares, or birds. Men's fertility accessories were often more macabre. Amulets might contain dried animal organs, most often testicles carried in small pouches tied to the waist or sewn into clothing. The symbolism was clear: carry fertility with you, and it will enter your life. This obsession with animal parts reflected the medieval fascination with sympathetic magic, the belief that consuming or carrying part of a creature could grant you its qualities. The most peculiar of these charms was the conception stone placed discreetly in undergarments during intercourse. Its supposed powers varied depending on the material emerald, for a boy sapphire, for a girl diamond for twins. The more valuable the stone, the stronger the effect was believed to be. In noble circles, presenting such a stone to a bride was a lavish and symbolic gesture, but not all charms were beautiful. Some were crude objects fashioned from bone leather or cloth stitched with symbols whose meanings have been lost to time. These belonged mostly to common folk who lacked access to luxury materials, but were no less determined to influence fate. Whether they worked or not was irrelevant. They offered hope in an age with few guarantees. When hope failed and marriages faltered, the legal consequences could be brutal. An impotence trial was as public and humiliating as any punishment of the era. These proceedings began with separate medical examinations of both spouses, often by multiple experts. Questions about intimacy were direct and detailed, leaving no room for dignity. If the examinations were inconclusive, the court might order the trial by Congress-supervised intercourse intended to settle the matter once and for all. The couple was given a set time watched in varying degrees of proximity by officials. If the husband failed to perform, the marriage could be annulled, freeing the wife, but branding the man with a permanent mark of shame. For some, the trial was repeated multiple times, over months or even years. Men, desperate to pass, might resort to herbal stimulants or concoctions of dubious safety, only to be searched for contraband before entering the chamber. A failed trial didn't just end a marriage. It could destroy reputations, sever alliances, and alter the course of inheritance. Women, too, faced invasive scrutiny. They were required to prove their own capacity for intimacy, often enduring intrusive examinations and insinuations that they might be to blame for their husband's shortcomings. The gender bias was blatant. In many cases, the woman's word alone could not condemn a man, but her conduct could still be put on trial. The gossip surrounding such trials was inevitable. Word would spread through towns and courts alike, turning the private failure of a marriage into public entertainment. For some men, accepting annulment without undergoing the trial was preferable to the spectacle, a choice that admitted defeat but preserved a shred of dignity. If the impotence trials exposed the private lives of nobles, the church's involvement in prostitution revealed the private hypocrisies of the clergy. In several medieval cities, bishops and abbots owned brothels, outright collecting rent and regulating operations while preaching chastity from the pulpit. They argued that prostitution was a necessary evil to protect against greater sins, but the prophets spoke louder than morality. In London's Southwark district, for example, the Bishop of Winchester controlled a network of licensed brothels employing hundreds of women. Regulations covered everything from working hours to clothing, and even dictated where the women could live. Fines and rents ensured that money flowed steadily upward from the prostitutes to the brothel keepers to the church itself. The church did not merely tolerate this arrangement, it integrated it into its economic structure. Income from sex work helped finance cathedrals, monastic communities, and religious festivals. This meant that offerings placed on altars might have originated in the very establishments the church officially condemned. Attempts at reform met stiff resistance. Closing church-owned brothels threatened not only clerical finances, but also the livelihoods of those who depended on the trade. For centuries, this uneasy alliance between piety and profit endured, revealing how flexible moral codes could become when large sums of money were at stake. While the church managed its brothels, ordinary people sought ways to prevent pregnancy that ranged from the eccentric to the dangerous. Some wore pouches containing weasel testicles, hoping to borrow the animal's supposed controlled fertility. Others drank mixtures of herbs, minerals, and animal parts, including mercury, with often lethal consequences. One of the strangest ideas was the sneezing method. Women would carry pepper or other irritants to induce sneezing immediately after intercourse, believing the force would expel semen. Needless to say, this technique was both ineffective and uncomfortable. Physical barriers were equally peculiar. Crocodile dung, honey-soaked wool, and other unlikely substances were used in the belief they could block or kill sperm. Some methods had a faint basis in reality, such as the lemon half used as a primitive cervical cap, but the discomfort and impracticality made them far from ideal. Timing was another misunderstood strategy. Medieval physicians believed women were most fertile during menstruation, which is in fact the least fertile period. As a result, couples trying to avoid conception often chose exactly the wrong time, all but guaranteeing pregnancy. Magical contraception combined ritual with superstition. Spells might require walking backward around a church 3 times, burying specific herbs under a full moon, or wearing amulets inscribed with charms. The belief was that divine or cosmic forces could be persuaded to prevent conception provided the instructions were followed exactly. Even withdrawal, one of the few effective methods available, was discouraged. Doctors warned it could cause blindness, insanity, or even death in men, claiming that semen retention was vital to health. In this way, cultural fear overruled practicality, and myths continued to shape the most intimate decisions of daily life. When you step back and look at the whole picture, medieval sexuality was a tapestry woven from contradictions. The same society that staged public consummations also whispered about magical underwear. The same church that thundered against lust kept brothels running under its seal. It was a world where desire was both feared and meticulously managed. Practices like bundling show the strange ways people tried to balance morality and opportunity. On the surface, the wooden board between 2 bundled lovers was a symbol of restraint. In reality, it was a flimsy barrier against a force far stronger than any plank of wood human nature. The elaborate aphrodisiac feasts reveal another truth, that sex was not merely a private act, but a public investment. A dynasty's survival could hinge on the fertility of a single couple, and every bite of bull testicle or sprinkle of saffron was a wager placed on the future. The bedding ceremony, so alien to modern sensibilities, was at its core about legitimacy and inheritance. In an era without DNA tests, witnesses and stained sheets were the legal proof that secured property titles and alliances. Love, if it existed, was secondary to the transaction. Astrological conception schedules and pilgrimages to fertile locations reveal the deep human need to impose order on the unknown. When the stakes were as high as the continuation of a bloodline, people clung to any system, no matter how unscientific, that promised to tip the odds in their favor. Fertility belts, conception stones, and animal part amulets might seem absurd today, but in the medieval mind, these were tangible connections to divine will and natural power. They bridged the gap between the body and the cosmos, offering hope in a world where childbirth was as dangerous as battle. Impotence trials and church-controlled prostitution lay bare the role of power in shaping sexual norms. Intimacy could be weaponized as a legal tool, a source of revenue, or a means of political control. In the hands of those in authority, the bedroom was never beyond the reach of the law or the pulpit. Contraceptive methods, from sneezing to lemon caps, underscore the desperation to manage reproduction in a time without reliable science. They also remind us that misinformation about the human body has always carried real consequences, sometimes fatal. Looking at these customs now, it's tempting to laugh at their absurdity, but they speak to timeless human impulses, the desire to control fate, the fear of failure, and the lengths people will go to protect reputation, lineage, and survival. Strip away the medieval trappings and we might recognize shades of these same impulses in our own world. So perhaps the most bizarre thing about medieval sexuality is not the bundling boards, the gemstone underwear, or the supervised consummations. It's the realization that in our own ways we still blend superstition, status, and desire into our intimate lives. The props have changed, the costumes updated, but the performance, the strange, intricate dance between passion and power, remains remarkably familiar.